One of the contestants on a US TV show called The Dating Game was hiding a deadly secret. Nobody knew it, but the bachelor in seat number 1 was responsible for the death of 4 women.
Please welcome Rodney Alcala. Rod, welcome.
Dating game killer who may have killed as many as 130 people across the country died early this morning while still awaiting his execution.
Hi guys, thank you for clicking onto my video. My name's Emily. Now today's case is of a dating contestant who went on the show during his murderous rampage. Let's just jump into it. Rodney Alcala was born in San Antonio, Texas on the 23rd of August 1943 to parents Anna Marie and Raul Alcala. In 1951, Rodney's father had moved them all to Mexico as his mum was really ill and she wished to die there. But he had actually abandoned them 3 years later. So with that, in 1954, Rodney's mum had up and moved him and both of his sisters to Los Angeles. Apart from his dad leaving at the age of 8, it seemed like Rodney had a normal childhood. At the age of 17, in 1961, Rodney had joined the US Army. He served as a clerk. This didn't last long though, as he had a nervous breakdown after he found out that his dad had died, so he went AWOL. He'd hitchhiked from Fort Bragg to his mum's house in Monterey Park. Now I looked this up, and he had hitchhiked 2,549 miles. Rodney was then discharged by the military psychiatrist on the grounds that he suffered with antisocial personality disorder. After leaving the army, he enrolled into the UCLA School of Fine Arts, where he graduated with a bachelor's degree in 1968. But this was also the year that he abducted Tali Shapiro. On the 25th of September, Tali was walking to school when she was approached by a man asking if she needed a lift. She said, "I don't talk to strangers," but this twisted little fuck convinced her that he knew her parents, so she got in the car with him. This was witnessed by a neighbour where he had took it upon himself, thank God, to follow him and see what Rodney was up to. And he saw Rodney taking Tali into his home. He had a gut feeling that something wasn't right, and when he saw what he saw, he phoned the police as fast as he could, as being back then, there was no mobile phones, so he had to get to a payphone. To them, she looked dead. But she wasn't, and they rushed in and gave her medical aid. But while doing this slimy little fuck had ran like the clappers, butt naked mind you, out the back door. It had been found that before the police had come and saved Tali, Rodney had raped and beaten her with a steel bar. He is literally the reason why us as parents do not let our children go out too far, even as they get older. The trauma that this 8-year-old little girl would have had to overcome would have been really intense. Rodney, on the other hand, had travelled 3,000 miles across the US to New York, where he enrolled himself to the NYU Film School, but under the name as John Berger, from 1968 to 1971. And this was still while he was on the FBI's 10 Most Wanted list. Even with that, he had still managed to get himself a job at New Hampshire Arts Camp. Yes, you guessed it, with children. But this time he used a slightly different name of John Berger. In June of that year, he had met 23-year-old Cornelia Criley, where he offered her to help her move into a Manhattan apartment. This was where he had raped and strangled her to death, but he wasn't charged with it until 2011, when investigators had matched a bite mark that was on her body to Rodney. After taking the life of Cornelia, he had just gone back to his day-to-day life, until 2 girls at the camp that were attending had recognised John Berger, aka Rodney Alcala. He was quickly arrested, and in 1971 he was just about to face the charges for what he'd done to Tali Shapiro, but ended up having to take a plea deal. But that meant that he was only sentenced from 1 year up to life after accepting the charges of only molestation. But somehow, the curly-haired butt nugget got out 34 months later. Yes, you heard me right, 34 months later, for what he'd done to Tali Shapiro. This happened because he was placed on an indeterminate sentencing program where the parole board actually had the power to release the offender depending on whether they were rehabilitated or not. And clearly, he bullshitted and lied through his teeth to get out on the streets in less than 3 years. This type of decision for this type of offender, I feel should have been left down to a judge, because within 8 weeks, he was rearrested for violating his parole for supplying cannabis to a 13-year-old girl. The girl had also told the police that Rodney had kidnapped her, but for some reason he hadn't been charged for kidnap, but he had been charged for supplying her with drugs, and he was sentenced to 2 years. But he was again released in 1977 out on the same programme. When he got out, his parole officer in LA had stupidly given him permission to fly over to New York to visit a family member, even though he was a known flight risk. And only 1 week after arriving, Rodney has set his sights on his next target, Ellen Jane Hoover. 11 months later, her remains had been found on the Rockefeller estate in Westchester Country. Witnesses have said that she had been seen with a man that matched Rodney's description in the days leading up to her disappearance and of the day of her disappearance. Rodney had also been seen at the Rockefeller estate where she had been found too. He was questioned in her disappearance, but Rodney said absolutely fuck all. He refused a polygraph test, and with no body, they had no choice but to let Rodney go. And he was on the first plane back to LA. In November of 1977, when he returned, he went on a murderous rampage and he killed 18-year-old Jill Barco. She was a runaway from New York, and at first police had thought that she was a victim of the Hillside Strangler, but it had been proven that she was actually a victim of Rodney Alcala. She had been found rolled up like a ball in the LA ravine. In December of 1977, Rodney had murdered 27-year-old nurse Georgia Wickstead. She had been found bludgeoned to death in her Malibu apartment. In the mix of this man, bold as brass, goes on a TV dating show.
And here they are.
Bachelor number 1.
Yes.
What's your best time?
The best time is at night. Nighttime.
Why do you say that?
Because that's the only time there is.
The only time? What's wrong with morning, afternoon?
Well, they're okay, but nighttime's when it really gets good.
Bachelor number 1. You're a dirty old man. Take it.
Come on, over here.
Now, I've seen killers be brazen before, but that's just taking the feckin' piss. This had then won him a date with Cheryl, but when they were backstage, she had a really weird feeling about him, and can you blame her? Just look at his eyes. She then thought, fuck that, I ain't going nowhere with this man. She literally being the epitome of trusting your own gut instinct. But he wasn't done there though, and Rodney had murdered 33-year-old legal secretary Charlotte Lamb. She had been found raped and strangled. She had also been posed in a particular chosen position. This was in a laundry room in an apartment complex called El Segundo. Also, in the same month, he had killed Jill Parenteau. She too had been raped, strangled and posed in a particularly chosen position. She was discovered in her Burbank apartment. Rodney had only been found out for these murders because investigators had learned that his DNA sampled under the new law state, which then gave them access to run his DNA through the entire system. They had then matched semen that was found at the scene of these 4 crimes. Which brings me to his 4th victim of the month of June, 12-year-old Robin Samso. I've forgotten to tell you that he was a photographer and he took loads, and I mean loads of photos for his sick and twisted recollection later on. But he had used this a few times to get girls and women's interest piqued. And the reason why I say this is because this worked with Robin. Robin was last seen at Huntington Beach. It is believed that she disappeared from somewhere in between the beach and her ballet class. One of her friends, Bridget, had spoken up and said that she was last seen when a man had approached them both asking to take their picture, which Robin had agreed to, but a neighbour had seen this.
All of a sudden, out of nowhere, pops up Jackie Young, my neighbor. You know, she goes, Bridget, is everything okay? Are you girls all right? And man, he took that camera, turned his head down, and you could almost see like smoke coming off his brushes. He was gone.
Later that day, the ballet studio that Robin was supposed to be attending for her class had phoned her mother and told her that Robin didn't show, to which her mother had phoned the police. 12 days later, Robin's remains had been found in the foothills of San Gabriel Mountains. This was 40 miles north from where she'd originally been last seen.
She was probably the most loving child a mother could have. Everything she did to please me. I loved her warmth.
She loved ballet, she loved dancing, she loved gymnastics.
She was the glue to the family.
She was my best friend.
Bridget had been interviewed and worked with police to compose a sketch of this dark-haired man that they were speaking with. This was then distributed through the entire of Southern California. This sketch had been recognised by Rodney Alcala's parole officer in LA, to which he quickly notified Huntington Beach PD. A search warrant was granted for Rodney's mum's house, where a receipt was found for a storage locker room. They had found a little silk pouch that contained earrings, clearly trophies, the sick fuck. But in his collection, there was a set of earrings belonging to Robin Samso, which was actually identified by Robin's mum herself. So with that, investigators got to arrest him before he'd done another Houdini act. And on the 20th of June 1980, Rodney Alcala had been sentenced to death for the murder of Robin Samso. But this little twat gets out via loophole, because by 1984, his conviction had been overturned because the jurors had been improperly informed about his previous sex crimes. So a second trial began in 1986, and it had basically been identical to the first one, all except the omission of his sex crimes. He again was sentenced to death. But in 2001, his conviction had been overturned again by the Federal Appellate Court, who thought that significant evidence had been held back from both trials. By this time though, Rodney's DNA had been run through the system, and like I said before, his semen had been found on Georgia Wickstead, Charlotte Lamb, Jill Parenteau and Jill Barcombe. In 2003, he was again tried for the murder of Robin Samso, along with the murder of these 4 women. But this time, he had acted as his own lawyer. He must have known that this wasn't going to go down well. This Looney Tune had fucked with the jurors for 5 straight hours, questioning himself. Literally, he was on the stand, addressing himself in a much deeper voice than he answered back with. Why the hell the judge allowed this pantomime to continue, I will never know. But during the questioning, he asked himself where he was on the day of Robin Samso's murder. And he replied that he was at Knott's Berry Farm applying for a job to be a photographer at the time that she was kidnapped. He'd also shown a video of him wearing earrings on the dating show. This was in an attempt to prove that these earrings were his and not Robin's. But this didn't hold up because it was a very blurry 1-second clip. He had also played them a really disturbing song. Fuck knows why though. However, during the entire trial, Rodney never really made an attempt to deny the fact that he had killed these women, only stating the fact that he doesn't remember killing any of them. So with that spectacle, he was sentenced to death for the 3rd time, and this time it stuck. Also, his other crimes were coming back to fucking bite him in the ass too, because in January 2011, a Manhattan grand jury had indicted him for the murders of Cornelia Crowley in 1971 and Ellen Hoover in 1977. He had been extradited to New York, where he originally pled not guilty, but in December of 2012 he changed his plea to guilty. He was given an additional 25 years to life, as the death penalty had been abolished in New York since 2007. He is also suspected of killing 13-year-old Antoinette Whitaker in July of 1977, as well as 17-year-old Joyce Gorn in February of 1978. Rodney had jewellery from both these women, which was found in his lock-up storage. He is also believed to have murdered 19-year-old Pamela Lamson in 1977. However, in 2016, Rodney had been charged with the murder of 28-year-old Christine Thornton, who had disappeared in 1977. Her body had been found in 1982, but it sadly hadn't been identified until 2015. This was because DNA had been supplied by one of her family members that had been matched to Christine. So in September of 2016, Rodney Alcala was charged for the murder of Christine Thornton. The more the years went on, the more victims that police had uncovered of Rodney Alcala's, and this had been going on for over 30 years. I can't even imagine how much of a constant reminder and pain this must have been for all the families of all his victims. But by the time he was to stand trial for Christine's murder, he was reportedly too ill to travel, suffering with deep dementia. This evil bastard had finally died in prison at the age of 77 on the 24th of July 2021. What an evil prick he was, and just to mess around in court, keep bringing the families back year after year for some kind of sick and twisted fucking pleasure. I'm glad he's dead now. It's just a shame that it took so goddamn long. Literally, the only comfort is knowing that he suffered in the last few years that he had on this earth. These were the many pictures that were on Rodney Alcala's camera. But that's it, guys. I'd love to hear your thoughts and opinions down in the comment box below. But just before you go, if you like content like this, feel free to like and subscribe. But until next time, I'm gonna love you and leave you. Bye!